The initial plan to pull the car around back, and then they had to abort mission, and the driver came up on the circle driveway instead, and then they went out the front door. Part of the plan was to remove Nancy via the front door.
I need you to stop what you are doing right now, not because of the blood on the porch, not because of the masked man on the doorbell camera, not because of the DNA sitting in a laboratory in Florida that may or may not ever produce a name. I need you to stop because of one word, a single word that a law enforcement official used in the earliest days of this investigation, a word that every headline repeated, a word that every podcast built around, a word that the entire national media coverage of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has been constructed on top of, and that word was never a fact, it was an assumption. And the moment you see it, the moment you understand what that word actually means, and where it came from, and what was never verified about it, you are going to look at every single thing you thought you knew about the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, and you are going to see it differently. Because there is a gap in this case, not a small gap, not an administrative detail that investigators glossed over, a gap of more than 2 hours that sits right at the beginning of the official timeline, a gap that the national coverage has been walking past for 66 days without stopping to ask the question that should have been asked on day one. What actually happened during those 2 hours? Not what investigators assumed happened, not what the family described, not what the ransom note implied, what actually happened, what evidence actually shows, what can be independently verified versus what has simply been accepted because someone used one word and nobody pushed back on it. This video is based on publicly available reports and expert discussions surrounding this case. All analysis is opinion. No individual is accused of any crime. Stay with us. Because by the time this video ends, you are going to understand something about this investigation that 66 days of national media coverage has not told you. And you are going to have a question that you will not be able to stop thinking about. Let us start with what the official timeline actually says, not what you have heard summarized. The actual documented, confirmed sequence of events as reported by multiple verified mainstream outlets Saturday, January 31st, 2026. At 5:32 in the afternoon. According to publicly available reporting, Nancy Guthrie left her home in the Catalina foothills and traveled to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. Nancy spent the evening with family. By all publicly available accounts, it was a normal evening. She had plans for the following morning, a weekly online church service she attended every Sunday without fail. At approximately 9:48 in the evening, according to confirmed reporting across multiple outlets, including the Associated Press, ABC 15, Newsweek, and the Washington Times, Nancy arrived home. The garage door opened. 2 minutes later at 9:50 p.m. the garage door closed, and then nothing. The public timeline goes completely dark for 3 hours and 57 minutes. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the doorbell camera reportedly went offline. At 2:12 a.m., software reportedly detected a person at the front of the home. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker application reportedly lost contact with her phone. 3 hours and 57 minutes between the garage door closing and any camera activity at the front of the property. 3 hours and 57 minutes that the national coverage has spent almost no time examining. And here is why that gap matters more than anything else in this case, because everything that happened during those 3 hours and 57 minutes, every detail of what occurred between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. is according to available analysis, based not on independent verified evidence but on an assumption, one assumption. From one word, the word is kidnapped, or in its various forms across different reporting, abducted, taken, seized from the very first hours of this investigation. According to available reporting, this case was publicly framed as a kidnapping. Nancy was kidnapped. Nancy was abducted. Nancy was taken from her home. And here is what you need to understand about that framing. It did not come from forensic evidence. It did not come from independent witness testimony. It did not come from camera footage that showed Nancy being physically removed from her home. According to publicly available reporting, including Savannah Guthrie's own account in her Today Show interview on March 26, 2026, the kidnapping theory reportedly came from a family member, specifically from Cameron Guthrie, Nancy's son. Savannah confirmed this directly on camera. When she called Cameron on the morning Nancy was reported missing, before law enforcement had publicly characterized what they were dealing with, before a single ransom note had arrived, before any press conference had been held, Cameron already had a theory. In Savannah's own words, describing that phone call, he knew. He said he thought their mother had been kidnapped for ransom before the note. before the investigation, before law enforcement had reached any public conclusion, the family reportedly named the theory first. And from that point forward, according to available analysis, the kidnapping framework became the lens through which everything else in this case was reportedly filtered. Now, what does that actually mean for the 2-hour gap? Here is the specific logical problem that the assumption reportedly creates. If Nancy was kidnapped, if she was forcibly removed from her home by an external actor, then according to that framework, the attack had to have happened after she arrived home at 9:50 p.m. and before the camera detected activity at 2:12 a.m. somewhere in that window. Somewhere between the garage door closing and the masked man appearing at the front door. But here is the question that should have been asked from day one, and according to available analysis has never been adequately answered publicly. How do investigators know what happened during those 3 hours and 57 minutes? What evidence independently verifies the sequence of events during that window? What camera footage covers the interior of that property during those hours? What independent witness observed what happened between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m.? The answer, according to available public reporting, is that the primary account of what those first officers saw when they arrived at Nancy's home, the primary description of the scene as it was found, came from the family members who were there before law enforcement arrived. Annie and Cameron Guthrie, according to publicly available reporting including Savannah's own account, arrived at their mother's home on the morning of February 1st. They were reportedly on the property for approximately an hour before anyone called 911. That call came in at 12:03 p.m. Deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. For approximately an hour. According to available reporting, the family was inside that crime scene before investigators set foot in it. And the description of what those first deputies encountered, the blood at the front threshold, the prop back doors, the missing camera, the context in which each of those things was found, came, according to available analysis, filtered through the account of the people who arrived first. Now here is where the word assume becomes the most important word in this entire investigation. According to publicly available reporting, when investigators in the broader public conversation began reconstructing what may have happened between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., the framework that was applied was the one the family had already reportedly named kidnapping for ransom, and within that framework, certain assumptions were reportedly made. It was assumed that Nancy went to bed after arriving home. It was assumed that the attack came later in the night. It was assumed that the masked man visible on the doorbell footage at 2:12 a.m. represented the beginning of whatever happened to Nancy rather than a later stage of it. It was assumed that the 2-hour gap between the garage door closing and the camera activity represented Nancy being home, safe, asleep, before someone came for her in the night. But here is what has never been publicly confirmed, according to available analysis. What evidence independently verifies that Nancy was alive and unharmed after 9:50 p.m.? Not what the family described. Not what the kidnapping framework assumes. What evidence? What camera? What recording? What independent source? Because if the answer to that question is, according to publicly available information, nothing, if the 2-hour gap between the garage door closing and the camera activity at the front of the property is genuinely unverified by independent evidence, then the assumption that Nancy was safe during those hours is exactly that, an assumption. And an assumption is not the same thing as a fact. Let us talk about what we can observe as documented and verified during that window. At 9:48 p.m., according to confirmed multi-source reporting, the garage door opened. At 9:50 p.m., according to the same confirmed reporting, it closed. 2 minutes. Former retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, in his on-record interview with Brian Anton during Day 59 coverage, looked at aerial drone footage of that property and identified what he described as perspective shots, a specific investigative technique being taken at the garage area. According to available analysis, perspective shots are taken when investigators have already formed a working theory about where a specific individual was positioned at a specific moment in time. They are reportedly not routine documentation. They are confirmatory. They reportedly build the evidentiary record to support a reconstruction. Investigators have already begun developing perspective shots at the garage. 2 minutes between the door opening and closing, a family that arrived before law enforcement, a kidnapping theory reportedly named before any note arrived. Stacker those 4 things together and ask yourself the question that emerges: Was the 2-hour gap actually what everyone assumed it was? Now here is where this becomes even more specific, because there is a second detail in the public record that has received almost no analytical attention in 66 days of national coverage. The masked man visible on the doorbell footage, according to available reporting, appeared at 2:12 a.m. The doorbell camera reportedly went offline at 1:47 a.m. That is a 25-minute window between the camera going dark and the software detecting motion at the front of the property. But think about what the masked man's presence at 2:12 a.m. actually represents in context. According to available expert analysis, including the publicly stated professional assessment of former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, the masked man at the front door was most likely not the person who carried Nancy through that door. The blood evidence at the front threshold, the donut-shaped drops that O'Connell and other forensic analysts described publicly as consistent with facial trauma and active bleeding, reportedly shows no voids, no footprint gaps in the blood trail. According to O'Connell's publicly stated analysis, the absence of voids suggests Nancy may have been carried, not walked through that threshold. Her feet were reportedly not on the ground. If Nancy was carried out by someone else while the masked man managed the camera, then the masked man at 2:12 a.m. was potentially not the first person to act at that property that night. He may have been, according to available analysis, a late-stage element of an operation that could have been in progress for significantly longer. And that raises the question that connects directly to the 2-hour gap. How long before 2:12 a.m. did the operation potentially begin? Let us talk about the back door. Savannah Guthrie confirmed publicly in her Today Show interview that when her family arrived at Nancy's home the morning she was reported missing, the back doors were found propped open, not forced, not broken, propped, held deliberately open. Former FBI Special Agent Raymond Carr told News Nation, according to available reporting, that he does not believe those back doors were an exit. His professional assessment is that they may have been an entry point, that someone could have entered through the back and left those doors open for operational purposes. Former retired NYPD Detective Michael Alcazar suggested publicly, according to available reporting, that the prop doors could indicate multiple participants. Now think about the timing question that those prop doors create. If someone entered through those back doors, when did they enter? Was it at 2:12 a.m.? Was it at 1:47 a.m.? Was it earlier? Was it during the 2-hour gap between the garage door closing at 9:50 p.m. and the first camera activity at 1:47 a.m.? Because if someone potentially entered through those back doors before 1:47 a.m., if someone was inside that property during the 2-hour gap, then the assumption that Nancy was home safe and asleep during those hours is not just unverified, it may be incorrect. Now here is the part that connects everything. According to publicly available reporting, when the ransom notes arrived, the first reportedly came to a Tucson television station on February 3rd and to TMZ on the same day. Those notes reportedly contained details about the interior of Nancy's home that had not been publicly released, including the reportedly specific location of her Apple Watch. Harvey Levin of TMZ described the Apple Watch details specifically as what had piqued FBI interest, saying it referenced where the watch was located in a place you would not necessarily immediately think to look. Interior knowledge, specific, detail, the kind of knowledge that reportedly comes from being inside that home. Now apply that detail to the 2-hour gap. If someone with interior knowledge of Nancy's home, someone who reportedly knew where the Apple Watch was kept, who knew which floodlight was broken, who understood the layout well enough to move through it in the dark, if that person entered through the back doors during the 2-hour gap between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., then the masked man at the front camera at 2:12 a.m. was potentially not the beginning of this story. He may have been, according to available analysis, a later stage of an operation that reportedly started much earlier that night. 3 scenarios. Think about each one carefully before deciding which one the available evidence suggests. Scenario 1, the official assumption. Nancy arrived home at 9:50 p.m. She went inside. She went to bed. She was safe during the 2-hour gap. The masked man at 2:12 a.m. represents the beginning of the operation. Everything that happened to Nancy happened after 1:47 a.m. Under this scenario, the 2-hour gap is genuinely empty. Nancy was home. Nancy was asleep. Nothing happened until the masked man arrived. But ask yourself, what independent evidence verifies this? What camera, what recording, what source independent of the family's account suggests that Nancy was alive and safe at any point during those 3 hours and 57 minutes? Scenario 2, the operation may have begun during the 2-hour gap. Someone possibly entered through the back doors before 1:47 a.m. Someone with interior knowledge of that property may have been inside while the masked man was not yet visible on any camera. What happened to Nancy, the blood at the threshold, the facial trauma that forensic analysts described as potentially consistent with blunt force, the rapid bleeding that O'Connell said appeared inconsistent with Nancy walking out under her own power. All of that potentially happened during the 2-hour window. The masked man at 2:12 a.m. managed the camera. The operation may have been already concluding by the time he appeared. Under this scenario, the 2-hour gap is not empty. It could be the window in which the most significant events of that night occurred. And the assumption that Nancy was safe during those hours would be incorrect. Scenario 3. Something may have happened at or immediately after the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m., the 2-minute window between the door opening and closing. The perspective shots that Kurt Dabb identified at the garage area in drone footage, the possibility that someone was already on that property inside the garage at the rear entrance, anywhere along the path from the garage into the interior of the home when Nancy arrived. Under this scenario, the gap could begin not at 9:50 p.m. but at 9:48 p.m., the moment the garage door opened. And what the perspective shots may document is what happened in those 2 minutes. We are not stating that any of these scenarios is confirmed fact. We are not stating that the official assumption is wrong. We are not accusing anyone of anything. The family has been cleared. The Pima County Sheriff stated publicly on February 16th that the entire Guthrie family, all siblings and their spouses, had been cleared as possible suspects. The polygraphs were passed. The consent searches produced no charges. What we are stating based on publicly available reporting, verified expert analysis, and the documented factual record of this investigation is that the assumption underlying the official timeline has reportedly never been independently verified by publicly available evidence. The 2-hour gap is real. It is in the public record. What happened during those 3 hours and 57 minutes is, according to available analysis, based primarily on the framework reportedly named by the family before law enforcement arrived and before any ransom note had been received. Former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona, who formerly led the Pima County Sheriff's Department, said publicly on Brian Anton Investigates, according to available reporting, that the crime scene was corrupted, that once it has been corrupted, you cannot reconstitute it, that the command-level decision to allow the scene to be opened before the lead detective completed evidence collection was not standard procedure, a reportedly corrupted crime scene, a 2-hour gap with no independent verification, a kidnapping theory reportedly named before any note arrived, a family that was inside the crime scene before law enforcement. These are documented facts from the public record of this investigation. And when you stack them, when you read them as a sequence, the question that emerges is impossible to dismiss what actually happened during those 2 hours. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer asked a question publicly according to available reporting that connects to everything we have discussed tonight. If the house was immaculate inside, if there were reportedly no signs of assault in the interior, why did Sheriff Nanos assign homicide detectives to this case from day one? Homicide detectives, not missing persons investigators, not abduction response. Homicide. That is, according to available analysis, a classification decision. An operational determination made at the command level that the circumstances of this disappearance were reportedly consistent with a violent crime resulting in death on day one, before any public characterization of this as a kidnapping, before the first ransom note arrived, a homicide classification on day one, and a reportedly immaculate interior with no signs of assault, and a reportedly corrupted crime scene, and a 2-hour gap with no independent verification. Those 4 things cannot all coexist with the assumption without a 5th thing explaining them, and that 5th thing has not been made public. Here is what this community should be demanding, not from us, from the officials responsible for this investigation. What independent evidence verifies what happened between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m.? What camera, what recording, what forensically processed evidence independently suggests the sequence of events during those 3 hours and 57 minutes? What specifically did the first deputy see when they walked through that door that reportedly justified a homicide classification before anyone was publicly calling it that? What do the perspective shots investigators reportedly took at the garage area document? What theory were they reportedly building? What does the raw pacemaker data actually show about cardiac activity in the minutes leading up to the 2:28 a.m. disconnection? These are not conspiracy questions. These are the basic evidentiary questions that should have been asked in week 1 of this investigation, and they have not been answered publicly in 66 days. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. Her medication is still reportedly on the counter. Her hearing aids are still reportedly in the house. She worked at the University of Arizona. She gathered 20,000 signatures to save the Poison Information Center before the internet existed. A colleague called her a quiet leader who was so effective without ever working at it. She stayed in that house for 40 years because it was her home. At 84, she was still hosting dinners, still playing cards, still watching the wildlife eat her plants and calling it wonderful. 2 months later, she has not been seen. The investigation is active. The evidence exists. The questions have answers. The answers exist inside the investigative record. And the most important question, the question this entire video has been built around, is not about who did this. It is about whether the investigation has been asking the right questions from the beginning, or whether it built itself around an assumption that was never independently stress-tested against the evidence that actually exists. If you have information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, anything at all, please contact 1-800-CALL-FBI, tips.fbi.gov. Pima County Sheriff's Department, 520-351-4900, combined reward, $1.2 million. Anonymous, tell me in the comments which scenario do you think the available evidence actually supports, 1, 2, or 3, because your read on this matters. And I read every single comment. Stotspur, turn on notifications because this case is not over. And the question we asked tonight is not going away. The Dot's claimer, Reddit video start. This video is produced for informational and analytical purposes only, based on publicly available reports and expert discussions surrounding this case. All analysis represents the opinion of this channel. No individual is accused of any crime. If you have information about this case, please contact 1-800-CALL-FBI.